The footage that set Washington on fire. Stefon Diggs had barely become a Washington Commander before one piece of footage sent the fan base into overdrive. And what happened next made this look like much more than another veteran chasing one last NFL contract. Just days after Washington brought Diggs home, cameras captured the star receiver stepping onto the practice field. Settling into his new surroundings and immediately getting work with Jayden Daniels, there was no long adjustment period in front of the cameras. Diggs looked energized, engaged, and determined to make his presence felt from the beginning. For Commanders fans, it was the first real glimpse of a combination they had been waiting to see. Daniels throwing to one of the most accomplished receivers of his generation, but the excitement had started even earlier. After reports surfaced that Diggs had agreed to a one-year contract worth up to $12 million, video began circulating of him embracing his connection to the area. The veteran receiver appeared at Maryland's first fall practice, shouting out the Terrapins before finishing with an enthusiastic message for his new NFL team. Go Commanders! That mattered because Washington wasn't simply another destination on Diggs' NFL journey. This was home. Diggs grew up in the Washington area and played college football at Maryland before beginning an NFL career that took him through multiple organizations. Now, after more than a decade in the league, he was coming back to where his football story began, and the cameras captured every step. Then came the jersey reveal. Diggs walked onto the field wearing No. Shabbat, another new number in a career that has already seen several different jerseys. But fans weren't staring at 18 for long. They were watching who was throwing him the football. Following practice, Diggs spent additional time working with Daniels, jogging through routes and catching passes, as the two began developing their timing. Terry McLaurin was also part of the picture, creating an image. Washington fans immediately understood Daniels, McLaurin, Diggs. Suddenly, the possibilities looked very different. And according to the source material, Washington wasn't Diggs' only possible destination. Other NFL teams had reportedly shown interest before he chose the Commanders. That raises the question that makes this entire story more intriguing. Why did Stefon Diggs choose Washington, and what does he believe can happen here? Because if those first practice clips are telling us anything, Diggs didn't come home just to wear another jersey. He came home with something to prove. Where are you watching from? If you believe Diggs can make Washington's offense significantly more dangerous, come on. If you think people are getting too excited over training camp footage, come on, dude. And subscribe to the channel. Because the real story behind why Diggs chose Washington is where things get even more interesting. Diggs chose Washington for a reason. The first practice clips were exciting, but the bigger story was the decision that put Stefon Diggs on that field in the first place. According to the reporting cited in the source material, Washington gave Diggs a one-year contract that could reach roughly $12 million with incentives. That alone made headline. But the real intrigue came from the teams he apparently did not choose. Kansas City, Miami, and Las Vegas were all reported to have shown interest. Diggs still picked Washington. That changes the way this signing should be viewed. This was not simply a veteran receiver waiting for the only offer available. Diggs had options. He had enough interest around the league to consider different quarterback, different systems, and different paths toward contention. Instead, he came home. For Washington, the timing could not have been better. The Commanders had been searching for a legitimate threat opposite Terry McLaurin, and Diggs instantly gave the offense a veteran route runner with a resume few available receivers could match. For Diggs, the move offered something different, familiar ground. He grew up in the Washington area. He played college football at Maryland. His family and support system remained connected to the region. After years of playing in Minnesota, Buffalo, Houston, and New England, he suddenly had the chance to return to the place where his football identity was first built. That is why those early videos carried more emotion than the average free agent arrival. Diggs was not walking into an unfamiliar city trying to learn where everything was. He was coming back to a place he already understood. And Washington was giving him something equally valuable: opportunity. McLaurin remains the established star. Jayden Daniels remains the centerpiece. Diggs does not need to carry the entire passing game by himself. He needs to win routes, force defenses to respect both sides of the field, and give Daniels another experienced target when coverage tightens. That could be exactly the situation a veteran receiver wants. The contract may only be for one season, but the message behind it is bigger. Washington believes Diggs still has enough left to change its offense. Diggs believes Washington gives him the right stage to prove it. And the first real test of that belief was already unfolding with the player throwing him the football. Diggs and Daniels, the connection Washington needed. The most important video from Stefon Diggs' first day was not the jersey reveal, it was the extra work with Jayden Daniels. after the main practice period ended. Cameras captured Diggs staying on the field with Washington's franchise quarterback, jogging through routes, catching passes, and beginning the process of building timing. It looked simple, but for an NFL offense, those small repetitions matter. A veteran receiver can understand a playbook quickly, but chemistry with a quarterback cannot be downloaded overnight. Daniels has to learn how Diggs comes out of breaks, where he expects the ball on option routes, and how aggressively he attacks certain coverages. Diggs has to understand Daniels' rhythm, ball placement, and preferred timing. That process started immediately, and Diggs has experience doing this with young quarterbacks. The source material points to his recent seasons catching passes from C.J. Stroud and Drake May before arriving in Washington. Now Daniels becomes the latest young quarterback paired with a receiver who has spent years learning how NFL defenses disguise leverage and coverage. That experience could become valuable beyond catches. Diggs has seen pressure looks, bracket coverage, late safety rotations, and almost every technique defensive backs can use against an elite receiver. Daniels does not simply gain another target, he gains another veteran set of eyes. That could matter on third down. It could matter in the red zone. And it could matter when Washington faces a defense that decides Terry McLaurin is the one player it refuses to let beat them. The early footage also suggested that Diggs understood the assignment. He was not acting like a superstar arriving to demand the offense revolve around him. He was putting in extra work and learning how Washington wanted to operate. Head coach Dan Quinn noticed it. According to the source, Quinn highlighted Diggs' willingness to lead, help younger players, and spend additional time working with Daniels, McLaurin, and others. That is exactly what Washington needs this signing to become. Not a celebrity appearance, not another viral training camp story, a football relationship. Because if Daniels trusts Diggs when a play breaks down, if Diggs understands exactly where Daniels wants him against pressure, and if both players can anticipate each other instead of reacting late, Washington suddenly becomes much harder to defend. But Daniels will not be the only player benefiting. For the first time in a long time, Terry McLaurin may have another receiver capable of forcing defenses to make an uncomfortable choice. Terry McLaurin finally has help. Terry McLaurin has spent years being the receiver every Washington defense prepares to stop first. Now that equation could finally change. Stefon Diggs arrives as one of the most accomplished receivers McLaurin has shared a room with. And that matters, because defensive coordinators can no longer build every coverage plan around removing one player. If a safety leans toward McLaurin, Diggs can get single coverage. If the defense rolls help toward Diggs, McLaurin gets more space. If both outside receivers demand extra attention, the middle of the field opens for everyone else. That is where the signing becomes more important than simple statistics. Diggs does not have to produce like the unquestioned #1 receiver of his Buffalo peak to transform Washington's offense. Even as a high-level #2, his presence can change the geometry of the entire passing game, and Diggs clearly understands where he fits. The source material describes him praising McLaurin's game, intensity, and passion. Rather than approaching Washington as a challenge to McLaurin's status, Diggs publicly treated him like a player he respected. That matters inside a locker room. Two accomplished veterans competing for targets can create tension if roles are unclear, but Washington's structure is fairly obvious. McLaurin is established. Diggs is the veteran addition. Daniels is the quarterback. Everything revolves around. If all three accept that hierarchy while still pushing each other, the Commanders gain something they have lacked: options. Imagine a 3rd and 7 with McLaurin isolated outside, Diggs working from the opposite side, and Daniels reading the leverage before the snap. Who does the defense double? Where does the safety rotate? Which corner is trusted alone? Every answer creates another problem. That is why fans reacted so strongly when footage showed McLaurin and Diggs working on the same practice field. It was not just two recognizable receivers standing together, it was proof of concept. For years, Washington fans have imagined what McLaurin might look like with another proven threat drawing serious coverage. Now they may finally find out, and for Diggs, this partnership removes some pressure too. He does not have to force production. He does not need 12 targets every Sunday to justify his presence. He needs to punish defenses whenever they forget about him. But the reason this pairing feels different goes beyond X's and O's. For Diggs, Washington is not just another locker room, it is the place where his football story started. This homecoming means something different. For most NFL free agents, joining a new team means learning a new city. For Stefon Diggs, Washington means returning to one. He grew up in suburban Washington and played college football at Maryland, making the Commanders one of the few franchises capable of offering something money alone cannot provide: Home. That word appeared repeatedly in the way Diggs talked about the move. His family is there. His support system is there. His football roots are there. And before he had even fully settled into his new NFL surroundings, Diggs appeared at Maryland's first fall practice, reconnecting with the program that helped launch his career. The timing made the moment feel almost scripted. A player spends more than a decade moving through the NFL, building his reputation across multiple franchises, surviving trades, injuries, expectations, and controversy. Then, late in his career, he returns to the region that knew him before the Pro Bowls, before the national headlines, and before millions of fans debated every move he made. That gives this season a different emotional layer. Diggs is not only trying to help Washington win, he is playing in front of people who watched him become Stefon Diggs. That can create pressure, but it can also create purpose. The source describes Diggs saying he loved being home and appreciated the organization, while also highlighting Washington's young quarterback. That combination explains why the Commanders could make sense beyond nostalgia. This is not a ceremonial homecoming. Washington needs him. Diggs still wants to prove he can produce. Daniels needs reliable weapons. McLaurin needs help. And Diggs gets to chase all of those goals without leaving the region where his family and history are already rooted. That is why turning down interest elsewhere becomes more meaningful. Another team might have offered a different role. Another quarterback might have offered a different opportunity. Another contender might have promised a clearer path on paper, but none of them could offer this exact story. The hometown player returning to the hometown franchise while he still believes he can make a difference. Now sentiment has to meet reality. Homecomings are powerful in July and August. By October and November, nobody cares where you grew up if you are not getting open. And that leads directly to the biggest football question surrounding this entire signing. Does Stefon Diggs still have enough left to be the player Washington needs? Does Stefon Diggs still have it? The name still carries weight. The resume is undeniable. But the NFL does not pay players for what they did 5 years ago. Washington needs to know what Stefon Diggs can do now. That is why every practice clip showing Diggs planting, cutting, and accelerating attracted so much attention. He is no longer being evaluated only as a former Pro Bowler. He is being evaluated as an older receiver coming off a recent injury history and trying to prove that his body can still match his reputation. According to the source material, Diggs returned from a torn ACL and still produced efficiently in New England. The script cites an 82.5% catch rate and describes that figure as the best among NFL wide receivers during that season. That is encouraging, but efficiency alone does not answer every question. Can he still separate against top corners? Can he maintain that sharpness late in games? Can he hold up through an entire season? Can he consistently win when defenses know where the ball is going? Those are questions training camp footage cannot settle. Still, Diggs' career production explains why Washington is willing to take the gamble. The source credits him with more than 900 career receptions, over 0,000 receiving yards, and more than 70 touchdowns. It also notes his remarkable 4-season run of 100 plus catches from 2020 through 2023. That kind of resume is not accidental. Elite route running tends to age better than pure speed because it is built on technique, anticipation, and understanding leverage. That could be the key to Diggs remaining valuable, even if he is no longer the exact athlete he was at his absolute peak. Washington is not asking him to become younger. It is asking him to become efficient. Beat the second corner, convert third downs, recognize coverage, give Daniels a dependable answer when the play gets messy, and punish defenses for devoting too much attention to McLaurin. A 1-year deal makes the risk manageable. If Diggs thrives, Washington could have one of the league's most experienced receiver duos. If he struggles, the commitment is limited. That is why the move looks like a prove-it deal for both sides. Washington is betting the football player is still there. Diggs is betting everyone questioning him will be reminded quickly. But football ability was never the only reason his arrival generated attention. Inside the locker room, one teammate needed only a single sentence to bring another side of Diggs' reputation roaring back onto the internet. "I wouldn't let him date my sister." Sam Cosmi needed one sentence to turn a football interview into one of the most talked about moments of Stefon Diggs' arrival. Asked about his new teammate, the Washington offensive lineman joked that he would not let Diggs date his sister. On the surface, it sounded like ordinary locker room teasing. But fans who remembered Diggs' Minnesota days understood the reference immediately. Years earlier, Vikings players had been asked which teammate they would least want dating their sister. Diggs became the runaway answer. The old clip became part of his public persona, and Diggs defended himself at the time by insisting he was a good guy whom people did not understand well enough. Now, nearly a decade later, A teammate in an entirely different locker room resurrected the joke. Of course, the internet loved it. The moment worked because it suggested something important about how Diggs was being received. Cosme was comfortable enough to tease him almost immediately. That is usually a better sign than silence. And the rest of the reaction around Washington was largely positive. Diggs praised Jayden Daniels as a superstar. He spoke highly of Terry McLaurin's passion and playmaking. He even singled out younger players, while Dan Quinn highlighted Diggs' willingness to stay late, work, and help raise the standard around teammates. That is a very different picture from the stereotypes sometimes attached to veteran stars arriving in new place. There was confidence. Certainly, Diggs has never lacked that. The source even references his belief that he can compete with anyone, and that few teams could claim to have a better second receiver, but confidence becomes valuable when it is paired with investment in the people around you. That appeared to be the message from day one. Work with Daniels, connect with McLaurin, talk to younger receivers, embrace the jokes, show that you are part of the room rather than above it. For Washington, that may be almost as important as the catches. A young quarterback and developing roster do not need another distraction. They need a veteran who understands that leadership is sometimes as simple as staying after practice and doing another route. But the Cosme joke also worked because Diggs arrives with years of headlines beyond football. And some of those headlines were far more serious than an old Vikings locker room survey. The controversy he had to leave behind. The positive practice footage did not erase the complicated public attention that followed Stefon Diggs into Washington. One of the most serious storylines involved criminal charges connected to an alleged dispute with a former private chef. According to the source material, the former chef accused Diggs of assault during an argument over unpaid wages. The case eventually went to trial, where Diggs faced a felony strangulation-related charge and a misdemeanor assault and battery charge. Those were allegations. The verdict matters just as much as the accusations. The jury found Diggs not guilty. The source says deliberations lasted roughly 90 minutes before jurors acquitted him on the charges. His representatives later characterized the result as vindication, while his attorney criticized what he described as attempts to financially target professional athletes. That distinction is important. Public accusations can dominate headlines long before a courtroom decides what has actually been proven. In this case, the criminal charges ended with acquittals. Still, the legal process had already become part of Diggs' public story. So had other aspects of his personal life. The source also references his high-profile relationship with Cardi B and the constant social media discussions surrounding off-field footage of Diggs during the off-season. Some fans questioned his focus. Others argued that athletes should be allowed private lives without every video becoming evidence about their commitment to football. That tension has followed Diggs for years. A practice catch becomes a headline, a personal appearance becomes a headline, a joke from a teammate becomes a headline, a relationship becomes a headline. Sometimes the attention comes because he is an accomplished NFL star. Sometimes it comes because Diggs himself has never been a quiet personality. Either way, Washington knew it was signing more than statistics. The Commanders were bringing in a player who generates conversation almost everywhere he goes. The most encouraging sign from his first week was that once Diggs stepped onto the field, the conversation quickly returned to football. Hoot, Daniels, McLaurin, leadership. The receiver room, that is exactly where Washington needs it to stay. Because the cleanest way for Diggs to control the next chapter of his public story is not through interviews, social media, or arguments about his past, it is through Sundays. And once the regular season begins, no viral video will matter if the production does not follow. Now the pressure becomes real. Training camp can sell possibilities. The regular season exposes reality. Stefon Diggs' first week in Washington gave Commanders fans almost everything they wanted to see. Energy, extra work with Jayden Daniels, respect for Terry McLaurin, encouraging movement after injury, a hometown connection, locker room chemistry. Now all of it has to become production. The role is obvious. Diggs steps into a receiver room that badly needed an established second threat. Behind McLaurin, Washington entered camp with younger or less proven options, creating a clear opening for a veteran of Diggs' caliber to immediately become one of Daniels' most important targets. That should make the offense more flexible. McLaurin no longer has to carry every high-leverage receiving situation. Diggs can work underneath or outside. Washington can move both players across formations and force defenses to reveal coverage. Young receivers can develop without being asked to perform like stars immediately. And Daniels gets something every young quarterback needs: experienced players who know how to get open when the original play does not unfold perfectly. But there is another side to the equation. Diggs is on a one-year deal. That means every month matters. If he performs, He strengthens Washington's offense and potentially rebuilds his value across the league. If he struggles, the explanation cannot remain about chemistry, adjustment, or old injuries forever. That is the gamble both sides accepted. The source material frames Washington's move as a relatively low-risk opportunity. The Commanders needed receiver help. Diggs wanted a meaningful role. The contract gives both sides a chance to test whether the fit is as strong on Sundays as it looked during those early practices. The potential ceiling is obvious. A confident Daniels throwing to McLaurin and Diggs could force defenses to defend the entire field differently. The floor is just as clear. If Diggs cannot stay healthy, cannot separate consistently, or becomes another storyline bigger than his production, Washington will have spent a season chasing a version of him that no longer exists. That is why the viral footage is only the beginning. The catches from Daniels look good. The number 18 jersey looked good. The homecoming story feels good. None of those things win games. The real story begins when defensive backs start pressing, safeties start disguising coverage, and Washington needs a conversion with the season on the line. That is when Stefon Diggs gets to prove whether this homecoming was a brilliant move or simply one more fascinating chapter. In a career that has never been short on attention, the homecoming gamble, Stefon Diggs has already won the first battle in Washington. He got people talking, the hometown story connected, the first practice footage spread. The routes with Jayden Daniels created excitement. The sight of Diggs and Terry McLaurin sharing the same field gave Commanders fans something they had wanted for years. But none of that decides whether this move succeeds. The real verdict will come on Sundays. Washington's strategy is easy to understand. Instead of asking a young receiver to suddenly become a proven WR2, the Commanders brought in a veteran who has already handled elite-level NFL coverage, played in multiple offensive systems, and produced across different stages of his career. The risk is controlled because the commitment is short. The potential reward is much larger. If Diggs can stay healthy and remain an efficient route runner, Daniels gains another receiver capable of winning important downs. McLaurin may see fewer defenses designed exclusively around stopping him. Younger receivers get more time to develop instead of carrying immediate pressure, and Diggs gets something valuable too. Oreshet, not an escape from everything that happened before, but an opportunity to make football the loudest part of his story again. That may be the most important lesson behind this signing. Careers are rarely perfect straight lines. Players change teams. Injuries happen. Public perception changes. Personal controversies can follow athletes far beyond the moment that created them. What matters next is how someone responds when another opportunity appears. For Diggs, Washington represents that opportunity. But leadership will matter just as much as statistics. A veteran does not help a young locker room only by catching touchdowns. He helps by preparing correctly, sharing knowledge, accepting responsibility, and showing younger players that confidence does not have to become ego. The early signs described by Dan Quinn were encouraging: extra work, communication, and involvement with teammates. Now consistency has to follow, and Washington must handle the situation intelligently too. The Commanders should not force Diggs to become the receiver he was at his absolute statistical peak. They should use the player he is today, an experienced route runner who can complement McLaurin, help Daniels recognize situations, and punish defenses when coverage shifts elsewhere. That is how this gamble becomes a partnership instead of a nostalgia story. Because coming home does not guarantee success, a famous name does not guarantee production, and viral training camp footage certainly does not guarantee wins. But sometimes the right player meets the right opportunity at exactly the moment both sides need each other. Stefon Diggs believes he still has something to prove. Washington believes he can help take pressure off its young quarterback and its number one receiver. Now there is nowhere left for the story to hide. The cameras will keep rolling, the expectations will keep rising, and every Sunday will answer the same question: was bringing Stefon Diggs home the move that pushed Washington's offense to another level, or was the excitement bigger than the reality? If you believe Diggs, McLaurin and Jayden Daniels can become one of the NFL's most dangerous offensive combinations. If you think Washington is taking too big a gamble on a veteran receiver, comment too and tell us why. And if you want more NFL stories breaking down the moves, personalities, and drama shaping the league, like this video, share it with another football fan, and subscribe to the channel, because the Stefon Diggs homecoming story has officially begun. Now he has to prove it was worth believing in.